The knock came at 6:04 in the morning, 3 sharp raps that didn't sound like a neighbor and didn't sound like a landlord either. Jordan Bailey stood in her kitchen with one shoe on, a granola bar clamped between her teeth, and she went still, the way you go still when a sound doesn't match anything you were expecting. She spat the granola bar into its wrapper. Through the peephole, green wool dress uniforms, brass buttons catching the hallway light, and behind the 2 younger men, an older one standing with his hands clasped at his back, like he'd been standing that way his whole life. She didn't open the door yet. She thought about Samuel, 3 weeks earlier. The corner by the shuttered pharmacy smelled like old rain, and the inside of the D train, and Samuel Reeves was already awake when Jordan turned onto the block, the way he was always already awake. Propped against the gate with his knees drawn up, and a cardboard sign resting against his shin. Anything helps. God bless. The flag sticker in the corner had started to peel. She hadn't planned on stopping the first time. She told herself that later, when it mattered, that it hadn't been some decision, some plan. Just a Tuesday where she'd made an extra sandwich because the bread was going stale and throwing food away felt like a small crime when her own cabinet had 4 things in it. Excuse me. She held it out, wrapped in a paper towel because she didn't own foil. I made too much. He looked at it for a long moment before he looked at her. Not desperate, measuring, like a man deciding whether accepting something would cost him more than refusing it. You need that more than I do, he said. That's debatable. She kept her arm out. But I'm offering. He took it with both hands. The way you take something you intended to keep, not something you intended to eat in the next 10 minutes. Thank you, Miss Jordan. Samuel. A nod, small and formal, like a man reporting his own name for the record. She almost left it there. She had a bus to catch, and a grandmother whose blood pressure medication cost more every refill, and a manager at the diner who counted her minutes like they belonged to him personally. But something in the way Samuel had said thank you, flat, no tremor in it, no performance, made her stay another 30 seconds. You take your coffee black? His eyebrows went up like nobody had asked him that in a long time. Black's fine. She brought the coffee the next morning. And the morning after that, a banana, because her grandmother always said a man needs something with potassium if he's sleeping outside. Though Jordan wasn't sure that was medically true, or just something Denise Bailey had decided was true 40 years ago and never revisited. By the second week, it wasn't a decision anymore. It was 6 a.m., a sandwich, a thermos, 3 blocks, 10 minutes, a bus. Samuel didn't talk about himself, not at first. He asked about her, the home health job, the diner shifts, the night class she was taking 2 evenings a week toward a social work certificate she wasn't sure she'd ever finish paying for. He listened like the answers mattered, which was more than she could say for most people who asked her questions. It was the 3rd week when he said something that didn't fit. An army transport truck rumbled past on its way to the recruiting station 2 blocks over, canvas sides snapping in the wind, and Samuel's hand, mid-reach for the coffee, stopped completely. Just stopped, fingers curled in the air. His jaw tightened. He said something low, almost under his breath, a string of numbers that sounded like a date, and then a name that broke off before it finished. Lieutenant Witt. Witt what? Jordan asked. He blinked, and whatever had opened in his face closed again, smooth as a door. Nothing. Old habit. He took the coffee from her hand like the moment hadn't happened. She let it go. People who slept outside carried things she couldn't see the shape of, and she'd learned not to go digging in places she hadn't been invited. But she noted it. The way you note a crack in a wall you're not ready to worry about yet. Denise noticed the sandwiches disappearing from the bread bag faster than usual. You eating today? She said one evening. Not really a question. Or are you feeding that man again? His name is Samuel. I didn't ask his name, baby. I asked if you ate. Jordan didn't answer, which was an answer. You can't carry the whole world on a diner shift and a homemade paycheck. Denise said, quieter now, and there was something under it that wasn't criticism so much as fear. The specific fear of a woman who'd watched her granddaughter give away things she didn't have enough of to begin with. I'm not telling you to stop. I'm telling you to look after yourself while you're looking after him. I hear you, Jordan said, and meant it, and kept making 2 sandwiches anyway. It was the 4th week when Samuel pressed something into her hands at the corner, a small drawstring bag, canvas gone soft and grey with age, tied shut but not sealed. Hold on to this for me, he said, What is it? Doesn't matter right now. His eyes were steady on hers, and there was something in them she hadn't seen before, not confusion, not the far-off look he got sometimes when trucks went by. Something closer to a decision he'd been putting off. Don't open it unless you have to. You'll know when that is. Samuel, that's not... She turned the bag over in her hands, feeling something small and hard shift inside it. That's not really an answer. He almost smiled. No, it isn't. The bus pulled up behind her, brakes hissing, and by the time she turned back around to press him further, he'd already closed his eyes against the brick wall. The conversation finished whether she was ready for it to be or not. She stood there a moment longer than she needed to, the bag warm from his hands, before she ran for the bus. Now. Jordan set her hand on the doorknob, 3 weeks in a lifetime away from that corner, and the men in Greenwall waited on the other side of it, patient as men who'd already decided this conversation was going to happen, no matter how long she took to open the door. She opened it. The oldest one stepped forward first, and even before he spoke, she understood, from the stars on his shoulder, from the careful, almost apologetic way he held himself, that whatever was in that canvas bag sitting in her nightstand drawer, she was about to have to open it. "Miss Bailey," he said, "my name is General Marcus Whitfield. I need to talk to you about Samuel Reeves. Who do you think Samuel Reeves really was, and why did a general come looking for him? Tell me your theory in the comments. If you're enjoying the story, hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for what happens next." Frank noticed first, in his way. "You're moving slow," he said, not looking up from the ticket rail. "Table 6 has been waiting on their check. I've got it. You had it 5 minutes ago too." He glanced at her then, actually looked, and whatever he saw made him set the spinner down. "You eating, Bailey?" "I'm fine." He didn't push it. Frank never pushed anything past the first question, but he didn't look convinced either, and he left an extra biscuit by her station without comment before the lunch rush swallowed them both. She'd started skipping her own meals somewhere in the second week, not as a decision so much as a quiet rearrangement. 2 sandwiches took less thought than 1 sandwich, and a plan for herself. Denise caught it properly that Thursday, over a pot of grits Jordan hadn't asked for and couldn't afford to refuse. "You've lost weight. Don't tell me you haven't. I raised you. I know your face. I'm working 2 jobs and a night class." "Everybody looks tired." "Tired isn't what I said." Denise's voice cracked at the edges in the way it did when fear was wearing anger like a coat. "I watched your mother be kind straight into an early grave, working herself sick for people who never once asked if she'd eaten. I am not telling you to stop. I am telling you that you cannot pour from empty." Jordan ate the grits. She didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound like an argument. She kept making 2 sandwiches anyway. She noticed the scar during the second week, on an ordinary morning that made it land harder, for having nothing to explain it. No uniforms, no engines, just his sleeve riding up as he reached for the thermos, and a line of puckered tissue running up his forearm, too straight to be an accident. "What happened there?" He tugged the sleeve down before she'd finished asking. "Old wound. Acts up sometimes." "That's not really an answer." "No," he said. "It isn't." She let it sit. He drank his coffee and asked about her night class instead, and she let herself be redirected, because pressing felt like it would cost more than the answer was worth. Not yet, anyway. The subject of the ground came up in the 3rd week, not deliberately, the way nothing about Samuel ever seemed deliberate. A kid on a bike nearly clipped a delivery van at the corner, brakes screaming, and Samuel's whole body went rigid before the boy even swerved clear. "You'd be amazed," he said once his breathing evened out, "how fast solid ground stops being solid." His eyes had that far-off cast, a door swinging halfway open onto a room he didn't let her see inside. Lost people that way once. Ground gave out under something we thought would hold. He didn't finish it. Didn't say how many. Didn't say what he'd done about it. Just let the sentence hang there, unresolved, and went quiet in a way that felt heavier than anything he could have said next. Samuel, did that happen? For real? Something closed over his face, quick and complete. "Man my age tells a lot of stories, Miss Jordan. Hard to keep them all straight." She didn't believe that. She didn't press it either. She just added it to the small, quiet inventory she'd been keeping, without quite admitting she was keeping it, The scar, the trucks, the name that had broken off mid-syllable that first week. Pieces of something she didn't have the shape of yet. It was the fourth week when he pressed the bag into her hands. Small, canvas, drawstring, soft with age, about the size of a fist. He produced it once the corner had gone quiet, once the early foot traffic had cleared. I need you to hold on to this. Hold on to it, or keep it. Hold on to it. He pressed it into her palms with both of his, the same careful weight he'd used the first morning he'd taken the sandwich from her. Don't open it unless you have to. How would I know when that is? You'll know. He nodded toward the gate, the cardboard, the sidewalk that had been his address longer than she wanted to think about. Things go missing out here. This can't. She wanted to ask what was in it. She could feel something small and hard shift beneath her fingers through the canvas. But whatever had opened in his expression a moment ago was gone again, and underneath it, something like relief. A man setting down a weight his shoulders had carried so long they'd forgotten what it felt like without it. Okay, she said, and slid it into her coat pocket. He was lighter for the rest of their 10 minutes that morning than she'd ever seen him, a story about a mule and a river crossing during basic training, and she laughed and let herself believe the mystery could stay a mystery a while longer without doing anyone any harm. She was wrong about that. She just didn't know it yet. The bus came. She caught it. 3 blocks later, glancing back out of habit, she saw Samuel still sitting against the gate, one hand resting flat against his own chest, like he was checking to make sure his heart was still doing what it was supposed to do.
He wasn't there on Monday. Jordan told herself it meant nothing. People who slept outside moved, got rousted by a beat cop, chased off by a business owner tired of stepping around them, found a better spot with less wind.
She stood at the corner, with a thermos going cold in her hand, and gave herself every reasonable explanation, and believed almost none of them. Tuesday, the cardboard was gone too. Even the damp outline where his body had worn a groove into the sidewalk over 6 weeks had started to dry at the edges, disappearing along with everything else. By Thursday, the knot in her stomach had stopped pretending to be anything other than fear. She went to Mercy Street Shelter after her diner shift, 10 blocks out of her way on feet that had been standing since 6 that morning. The woman at the intake desk had the specific practiced weariness of someone who'd fielded this exact conversation 1,000 times and expected to field it 1,000 more. Name? Samuel Reeves. Older man, white, late 60s, usually stays near the bus stop on Clayton. We don't track people who don't check in here. Can you just look? Jordan heard her own voice climbing and made herself bring it back down. Please. The woman sighed, typed something, waited, shook her head. Nothing. Look, honey, people move around. He probably found another spot. They do that. Jordan called 2 hospitals that night from the diner's break room, and both times got the same wall. No information without a family relation or a patient ID number she didn't have. She lay awake with the drawstring bag on her nightstand, its outline black against the streetlight coming through her window, and thought about opening it, unless you have to, and decided this still didn't count, though she couldn't have said exactly why, except that it felt like giving up on him to open it before she knew for certain something had happened. On the 7th day she found him. She almost missed him from the bus window, thinner, greyer, folded into himself against the gate, in a way that made him look smaller than the man she'd been bringing coffee to for 6 weeks. She was off the bus and running before she'd fully decided to move. Samuel. He looked up slowly, and for one terrible second she thought he didn't recognize her, and then his face opened, tired, but real. Miss Jordan, where were you? I went to Mercy Street. I called hospitals. I didn't know if had a spell. His voice came out rougher than usual, like something had scraped it raw. I'm upright. That counts for something. It didn't look like it counted for much. His hands shook faintly around the coffee she pressed into them, and there was a greyish cast to his skin that hadn't been there a week ago. She sat with him longer than she had a bus schedule to spare for, and when she finally had to leave, she made him promise, actually promise, the way you'd extract a promise from a child, that he'd be there tomorrow. He was there for 4 more mornings after that. On the 5th, she was crouched beside him, handing him the thermos, when his hand started shaking in a way that had nothing to do with cold. Samuel? He tried to say something. It came out, as sound without shape. The thermos hit the sidewalk and rolled, coffee spreading dark across the concrete. And then his whole body folded, knees, shoulders, all of it going at once, and Jordan caught him before his head found the pavement. "Somebody call 911." Her own voice sounded far away to her, like it belonged to someone standing outside her body. A woman across the street already had her phone out. A man in running clothes slowed, looked, kept jogging. Jordan didn't have room to be angry about that yet. She lowered Samuel onto his side, hands shaking worse than his breath coming shallow and wrong. "Stay with me, come on, stay with me." The ambulance took 7 minutes that felt like an hour. She climbed into the back without being asked, and when a paramedic said, "Are you family?" she answered before she'd decided to lie. "I'm all he's got." Nobody argued with that. The emergency room moved in 2 speeds, frantic and glacial, and Jordan sat in a green plastic chair bolted to the floor for 2 hours before a nurse called her name and led her to a desk where a woman in scrubs sat behind a monitor, name tag reading R. Williams patient intake, wearing the specific exhaustion of someone working the wrong shift on the wrong day. "You're here for Samuel Reeves? Yes. Is he okay?" "Stable. Dehydration, possible cardiac event. We're running tests." Rachel clicked through something without looking up. "But we've got a problem. No insurance card, no ID, no listed emergency contact. Without documentation on file, he'll need to be transferred to county overflow once he's stabilized. That's just how the paperwork routes without a record. County general is a nightmare. People wait for days. It's policy." Rachel's voice was flat, not unkind, just worn smooth by repetition. If there's no way to establish who he is or what coverage he has, he's a veteran. Jordan heard the words leave her mouth and only half recognized the certainty in them. "Check the VA system. Do you have documentation of that?" "No, but I know he served. I know it." She thought of the hill, the mule, the half-finished name, Lieutenant Witt, the scar that was too straight to be an accident, the way his whole body had gone rigid at the sound of an engine backfiring like a rifle. All of it, pieces she'd been quietly collecting for 6 weeks without letting herself add them up. "Please, just run the check." Rachel looked at her the way people look at someone they've decided is either lying or delusional, and Jordan understood she needed something more than please to move this woman. "I'm his goddaughter," she said. "That's why there's no paperwork." "He doesn't have family. I'm what he's got." It wasn't quite a lie, and it wasn't quite the truth, and Jordan felt the weight of that distinction settle into her chest and stay there. A doctor passing behind the desk, mid-40s, ID badge reading Dr. Patel, paused. "Run it as a courtesy, Rachel." "If there's no match, he goes to county once he's stable," Rachel said. "If there's a match, we keep him." "Fair," Rachel typed. The wait stretched, 30 seconds folding into something much longer. And then the monitor chimed and Rachel's expression changed. Not softened, exactly, but sharpened, like she'd walked into a room she hadn't expected to find behind that door. "There's a match," she said slowly. "Samuel Allen Reeves, born 1958. Honorable discharge, 2003. She scrawled, and something in her face shifted further. Most of the service records redacted. "There's a citation flagged here, Silver Star, dated 1994. The details around it are blacked out, but there's a name attached to it that isn't redacted." "What name?" Rachel turned the screen slightly, not quite letting Jordan see it directly, but reading it aloud instead, like she needed to say it to believe it. "Second Lieutenant M. Whitfield." The name landed in Jordan's chest, like something she'd been waiting 6 weeks to hear finish itself. Second Lieutenant, 30-some years ago. Jordan stared at the name, suddenly understanding that whoever General Whitfield was now, he hadn't always been that. A hill that gave out. A year that lined up close enough to make her chest go tight, though she had no way yet to know if it was the same hill, the same year, the same man Samuel had carried a half-mile on a leg that wasn't cooperating. It might have been. It might have been nothing at all like it. She didn't know, and not knowing sat in her differently than fear did, closer to a held breath. Dr. Patel had come around the desk to look at the screen himself, and his posture changed too, some private recalibration happening behind his eyes. "Transfer him towards C. I'll authorize the VA billing myself." "You sure about that?" Rachel asked. With a record like this, they won't fight it. He looked at Jordan, and his voice gentled. You can see him in about an hour. He's going to need someone checking on him regularly. I will, Jordan said. Every day. She sat back down in the green chair, and this time, when she pulled the drawstring bag from her coat pocket and turned it over in her hands, she didn't open it. But her thumb traced the hard shape inside it, over and over, like she could read it through the canvas if she just pressed hard enough. Whoever he was now, he had a name. And somewhere behind 6 weeks of half-finished sentences, Jordan understood she'd just found the edge of something much larger than a man sleeping at a bus stop. The VA long-term care facility sat across town, 2 buses and a 15-minute walk that ate a piece out of every visiting day Jordan could scrape together. She went twice a week at first, then 3 times once her schedule allowed it, riding buses on her one day off just to sit beside a bed with real sheets on it instead of cardboard. Samuel improved there in a way that made Jordan's chest ache with something close to hope. Regular meals put colour back in his face. Medication steadied the shake in his hands. He slept under an actual blanket, and when she brought him a new one anyway, navy fleece, the softest thing she could afford on a diner paycheck, he held it against his chest for a long moment before he could speak. Nobody's done this much for me in 20 years, he said, and his eyes were wet. And Jordan reached for his hand because there wasn't anything she could say that wouldn't cheapen it. He started writing in a small leather notebook she'd never seen before, slow and careful, filling page after page on some visits and staring out the window without touching it on others. What is that? She asked one afternoon in July. My memory going. He said it simply, like a weather report, writing down what's true before it isn't anymore. He closed it and held it out to her. I want you to have this. Samuel, I can't. Just take it, please. His voice had an edge of urgency under the calm. If anyone ever asks what happened to me, you'll know what's true. She took it and didn't open it that day. Some instinct told her that these things, the bag and now the notebook, weren't meant to be opened while he was still there to explain them. She just held it the same careful way he'd once held her sandwich, and understood she was being handed pieces of a man faster than she could assemble them. That was the visit when he finally told her about the hill without stopping halfway through. 1994, he said, staring at a spot on the wall like the year itself lived there. Training exercise gone wrong, though nobody ever wrote it down as wrong. Ground gave out, under a position that should have held. I had a young second lieutenant under me, fresh out of West Point, convinced he was going to be the one who died out there, proving himself to men who didn't need proving to. He paused so long Jordan thought he might not continue. I wasn't going to let that happen. Carried him a half-mile on a leg that wasn't cooperating anymore. Cost me some hearing in one ear. Cost me some other things too, eventually, though it took longer to notice. The lieutenant, Jordan said carefully, was his name Whitfield? Samuel's eyes came back from the wall and settled on her, sharp in a way she hadn't seen from him in weeks. How do you know that name? They found it on your record. At the hospital. Something moved through his face, not anger, but something closer to old grief finally being allowed a witness. Marcus Whitfield, he said. He's a general now. Has been for years. I never contacted him. A man doesn't remind another man what he owes. He looked down at his own hands, folded in his lap. But I've thought about him every year on that date. Every single year. Why not just call him? If you saved his life, he'd have. It's not that simple. Samuel's jaw tightened, and for a moment he looked less like a tired old man in a hospital bed, and more like someone standing guard over something. What happened on that hill isn't exactly what's written down. The official version says, the ground failed. That's true enough as far as it goes. He stopped himself there, the way he always stopped himself, a door swinging shut halfway open. There's more to it than that. I wrote it down instead of saying it. Some things are safer on paper than in a man's mouth. Written down where? He didn't answer that directly. He just looked toward her bag, where the notebook now lived, and said nothing else about it, that visit. 2 weeks later, sitting up in his bed with better color in his face than she'd seen since the ambulance, he handed her a sealed envelope, the address on the front written in handwriting that shook more than his usual careful print. If something happens to me, he said, I need you to mail this. Samuel, just promise me. His voice left no room to argue, the same tone he'd used the day he'd handed her the bag. Promise me. I promise, Jordan said, and meant it, though she didn't yet understand what promising it would cost her. That night, back in her apartment, she finally let herself open the notebook. Not the letter. Not yet. Just the notebook, which he hadn't asked her to keep sealed. Most of it was what he'd said it would be. Memories. Names of men she'd never know. Small kindnesses recorded like debts he wanted to make sure got paid somewhere, even if he never lived to pay them himself. But 3 pages in, tucked between an entry about his mother's garden and one about a dog he'd had as a boy, was a paragraph written in his own hand. Read differently, tighter, more careful, like something drafted and redrafted until it said exactly what he meant. The ground didn't just give out. Someone knew that slope wouldn't hold 2 days before we walked it. I have the maintenance log that proves it, and I've had it 30 years and I never once used it, because using it meant naming who signed off on it, and that man had a family same as anybody. But if Marcus is ever going to stop carrying what he thinks he owes me, he needs to know the truth wasn't his to carry in the first place. It was never his fault. It was somebody else's signature. Jordan read it twice, then a third time, her mouth dry. This wasn't a keepsake. It was evidence, 30 years old, carried through shelters, bus stops, and countless nights on cardboard. Samuel hadn't kept it out of sentiment. He'd kept it because he'd never been able to decide whether using it would be justice or simply another kind of harm. She understood then why he hadn't simply mailed a letter that said, "Thank you for saving me," or "I forgive you for never finding me." Whatever Samuel was asking General Whitfield to accept, it wasn't a reunion. It was a weight Samuel had decided, at the very end, someone else needed to carry instead of him. Samuel died on a Tuesday in late August. The call came at 6 a.m., while she was standing in her kitchen with the coffee pot in her hand and one shoe already on. "Miss Bailey, this is Pine Valley Care. I'm calling about Samuel Reeves." The coffee pot didn't move. Neither did she. He passed peacefully in his sleep last night. Heart failure. "I'm very sorry for your loss." The words arrived and didn't land anywhere real. Jordan heard herself say she'd come in, heard herself hang up, and then she was sitting on her kitchen floor with the coffee pot still in her hand, and the grief hit all at once, the way water finds every crack in a foundation at the same time. She didn't cry. It was too big for that, too heavy, sitting in her chest like something solid. At the facility, they gave her a plastic bag with everything he'd owned, the navy blanket folded neat, 2 shirts, and at the bottom, a small envelope with her name written on it in his hand. She opened it standing in the hallway. Inside was a photograph, Samuel, decades younger, in uniform, and beside him a young officer, with a face she now recognized, 40 years erased from it. The same sharp jaw she'd seen described to her only in a name, until now. On the back, 3 words in shaky pencil. "Find him. Please." She went home. She sat on the floor of her apartment, with everything in front of her. The bag she'd finally opened, the dog tags, the redacted service record, the notebook with its careful confession, the photograph, and finally, the sealed letter she had promised to mail. She'd already broken the seal on the notebook. She told herself the letter was different. That one wasn't hers to read before it reached the man it was written for. She mailed it unread the next morning, standing in line at the post office for 20 minutes, with the envelope pressed flat against her chest, like it might escape if she loosened her grip. "I need to send this," she told the clerk, sliding it across the counter. "560, the woman said, weighing it without ceremony, stamping it, tossing it into a grey bin already half full of other people's mail. It disappeared into the pile like it had never been anything but paper. Walking out, Jordan felt hollow in a way she didn't have a word for yet. She told herself no 4-star general read letters from broke 22-year-olds he'd never met. She told herself she'd done what she promised, and that the promise itself was the whole of it, and that whatever happened next, or didn't, wasn't really her business anymore. But she kept the notebook, and she kept turning that one paragraph over in her mind again and again, the way you turn over something you're not sure you were supposed to find. "I have the maintenance log that proves it, and I've had it 30 years. Whatever was coming, It wasn't going to be as simple as a general saying, "Thank you." She believed her own quiet version of the story for exactly 11 days. On the 12th morning, 3 sharp knocks landed on her apartment door at 6:04 a.m., and when she looked through the peephole, she saw green dress uniforms, brass buttons, catching the hallway light, and an older man standing behind the 2 younger ones with his hands clasped at his back, waiting the way a man waits when, after decades of owing something, he has finally decided to ask for what he still needs. Jordan opened the door. The general stepped forward first, tall, silver at the temples, the kind of stillness that came from decades of being watched. "Miss Bailey, my name is General Marcus Whitfield. I need to talk to you about Samuel Reeves. I know who you are," Jordan said, and something in her own voice surprised her. Steady, not the voice of a 22-year-old standing in a hallway in one shoe. "I read the letter before I sent it, and I read the notebook." Whitfield's face didn't move, but something behind it did. "Then you know more than I do." He glanced past her, into the small apartment, at the coffee pot still sitting cold on the counter. "May we come in?" She let them in. 2 young officers took up positions near the door like furniture that happened to breathe. Whitfield sat where she pointed, at her kitchen table, hands folded the way Samuel's had been folded in his hospital bed, and for one disorienting second, she saw the resemblance, not in the face, but in the stillness of men who had learned to carry things without letting their hands show it. "I got the letter 9 days ago," he said. "I've read it more times than I could count." He reached into his jacket and set something on the table between them, the envelope, worn soft at the corners already, like he'd been carrying it against his body. "He wrote that you fed him every morning for 6 weeks, that you didn't know who he was, that you stayed anyway. He was hungry," Jordan said. "That's not complicated." "No." Whitfield's jaw tightened, briefly, the same tightening she'd seen in Samuel 100 times, without understanding where he'd learned it. "But what he did for me was, and I never once tried to find him." "Why not?" The question came out harder than she meant it, and she didn't take it back. Whitfield looked at his own hands for a long moment. "Because the last time I saw Sergeant Major Reeves, I was 23 years old and terrified, and he carried me half a mile on a leg that wasn't holding him up either, and I told myself I'd find him once I'd earned the debt back. Once I was someone worth him knowing." He shook his head slowly. "I kept becoming someone. Captain, Major, Colonel. Every promotion felt like one more excuse to wait until I deserved to knock on his door. By the time I had the rank to actually move mountains looking for him, I also had 30 years of shame telling me I'd waited too long to start." He finally met her eyes. "I convinced myself I'd tried." "You want me to tell you that's enough?" Jordan said. It wasn't a question. No. His voice cracked on the word, just slightly. "I want you to tell me what he was like. At the end, I need to know if he was afraid." Jordan thought about the corner by the shuttered pharmacy, the sandwich split in half, the mule story, the way his whole body had gone lighter the morning he'd handed her the bag. She thought about the hospital room, the navy blanket held against his chest like something precious. "He wasn't afraid," she said. "He was tired. There's a difference." Whitfield's eyes filled, and he didn't hide it, which she hadn't expected from a man with stars on his shoulder. She reached into her coat, where the bag had lived for 2 months now, and set the small drawstring pouch on the table between them. "There's something else you need to see. He carried that evidence for 30 years, and never used it." She laid out the brittle service record beside it, the redacted lines, the one sentence that had survived, recommended for Silver Star. Action credited with saving the life of 2 Lieutenant M. Whitfield. Then she opened the notebook to the page she'd read a dozen times since, and turned it so he could read it himself. The ground didn't just give out. "Someone knew that slope wouldn't hold 2 days before we walked it." Whitfield read it once, silently, and then again, his finger tracing under the line about the maintenance log, and Jordan watched 30 years of quiet guilt reorganize itself into something else entirely on his face. "He knew," Whitfield said, half to himself. "He knew this whole time, and he never." He stopped. "I built an entire career believing I owed him a life, and he was carrying proof that I never should have been standing on that hill in the first place." He set the notebook down carefully, like it might still be capable of hurting someone. He protected a dead man's family for 30 years instead of clearing his own name. He said using it would mean naming who signed off on it, Jordan said. He said that man had a family too. That's Samuel. Whitfield's voice had gone rough. That was always Samuel. He didn't offer her money first. She'd half expected it, some gesture that would let a powerful man feel he'd settled a debt cleanly, and when it didn't come, she understood something about him that made the rest of the conversation easier. There's an honors ceremony being arranged, he said instead. Full military honors. Posthumous review of his record. The Silver Star finally entered without redaction. The maintenance log will go to the Inspector General's office, quietly, and only far enough to close old questions, not to destroy another family the way it could have destroyed mine. He paused. I'd like you to speak. Not because you owe anyone that, because I think people should hear what actually happened at that bus stop, not just what happened on that hill 30 years ago. I'm nobody, Jordan said, the old reflex rising before she could stop it. He didn't think so. Whitfield nodded toward the notebook. Neither do I. The ceremony was smaller than she expected, held on a grey morning at Arlington, folding chairs on damp grass. When the honor guard finished, an officer folded the flag into a tight triangle and looked for the family to present it to. There wasn't one. There was only Jordan, and the officer walked it to her without hesitation, without needing anyone to explain why that was correct. She was the closest thing to family Samuel had made in this world, and by the time the flag reached her hands, everyone standing on that grass understood it too. The program listed him simply, Samuel Allen Reeves, retired Sergeant Major, United States Army. It was the first time Jordan had seen his full rank written anywhere, and she understood, reading it, that the man who'd once told her a story about a mule crossing a river had spent decades earning the quiet authority she'd always sensed in him, without knowing its name. A reporter from a local paper stood near the back, and after the honor guard had finished and the crowd had begun to loosen, he approached her with a notebook of his own. Miss Bailey, why does a man like General Whitfield personally escort a homeless veteran's memorial? Some people are saying this is more about optics than about Sergeant Major Reeves. She could have deflected it. Instead, she looked at him steadily, the way Samuel used to look at people who tried to move him along. He never asked me to see his medals, Jordan said. He asked me to see him. I did. That's the whole story. If it looks like more than that to you, that's probably worth asking yourself why. The reporter didn't have a follow-up. Months later, Jordan stood at the same corner. The shuttered pharmacy gate rusted a little further. The sidewalk swept clean of any trace that a man had ever slept there. She worked at the VA now, 3 days a week, helping veterans untangle the exact kind of paperwork that had once buried Samuel alive. Denise still made grits on Thursdays and still told her not to pour from empty, and Jordan still sometimes didn't listen because some things about her hadn't changed and didn't need to. A boy stood beside her at the corner, Malik, 14, from the outreach program the fund had started in Samuel's name, quiet and watchful in a way that reminded her, sometimes, painfully, of someone else. You're really going to give this to some stranger? Malik asked, eyeing the paper bag in her hands. Someone taught me that small things aren't small, Jordan said. I'm just passing it on. The bus pulled up. They climbed aboard together. As it pulled away from the corner, Jordan glanced back through the rear window, out of habit. An old habit now, worn smooth with use. For just a moment, the grey morning light seemed to put him there again, knees drawn up, one hand resting flat against his chest, watching the buses pass like he had every morning before she knew his name. Then the bus turned the corner, and the sidewalk was empty. Jordan looked forward again. She didn't turn back. She kept the flag folded on her windowsill, and some mornings before her shift, she still made 2 sandwiches out of habit before she remembered there was only one of her now. She ate the second one anyway. It seemed like the right thing to do with it. Kindness doesn't ask what it will get back. It just shows up, morning after morning, sandwich after sandwich, because someone is hungry and you have enough to share. You never know who you're feeding or who's been carrying something heavy for 30 years, waiting for one person to simply see them. Be that person. The world doesn't run out of people who need it. If this story moved you, don't scroll past it. Hit like, Drop a comment telling us what you'd have done in Jordan's shoes, and share this with someone who needs a reminder that small acts of kindness never really stay small. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Someone near you needs to be seen today. What will you do about it?